Welcome to the Church360 Ledger Transactions, Reports, and Reconciliation webinar. Hi, my name is Rod Kiles, and I am the Customer Onboarding Specialist for Concordia Technology Solutions. I've been with the company over 17 years now, and I really appreciate the opportunity to serve churches. You can reach me one of two ways. Of course, you can reach me by email at rod.kiles@cph.org. And if you'd like to give me a call, you can call me at 314-268-1315. I kindly ask that you mute your phones and or microphones and post any questions you may have into the question window. Joining me today is going to be Jordan Bogart. He's one of our support technicians. He's been with the company several years as well, and he can answer any questions you have. He'll be the one answering the questions inside the question window. If you'd like to reach him, you can shoot him an email and send that to jordan.bogart@cph.org. And you can also give him a call at 1-800-346-6120. So let's go ahead and let's go through our class agenda for today. So we're going to start out with the class overview. We'll go through and discuss the different topics that we're going to cover today. This is a brand new, this is the first time we've ran this webinar series. So this is like a first run for this webinar, but we're going to go through and we're going to have a discussion, and the first part should last about 45 minutes. Now, we're planning this for 90 minutes, but since it's a first run, the timing may be a little bit off there, but we're going to try to do the first discussion and have that last for about 45 minutes, then have our intermission. The intermission lasts about 5 minutes, a short little break there where we can step away, grab something to drink, or just do whatever we need to do during that 5 minutes. After the intermission, then we'll have the second half of our discussion where we'll finish up any topics that we still need to cover. Then once that's done, we'll have our short quiz, then we'll have our question and answer session, then we'll head to lunch or finish up whatever task we need to do for the day. So the start of this webinar, we're going to start out and discuss transactions. So that's a large part of our focus today. And with transactions, we're going to go in and we're going to talk about the transaction conventions. We're also going to discuss debits versus credits. Those really govern how our transactions work. We're going to talk about pending transactions. We're also going to go through and talk about managing transactions, voiding and copying and editing transactions. So we'll talk about all those items as well. And then we'll transition into reports. With reports, there's several different reports inside the system. There's the general ledger report, there's the balance sheet report, there's the chart of accounts report, and there's, I have balance sheet on there twice. Statement of income and expense is the fourth one. So it's general ledger, balance sheet, chart of accounts report, and statement of income and expense. So once we get done with our reports, we would have reviewed all of our transactions and our data. Then it'll be time to do a bank account reconciliation. So we'll walk you through doing a bank account reconciliation. We'll review the event log. We'll have our quiz, and then we'll head home. Or we'll have our quiz and we'll have our question and answer session, then we'll head home. So I'm excited, as you can tell. I hope you're excited as well. Why don't we go ahead and get started? So I'm going to go ahead and switch screens over to Church360 Ledger, and I'm also going to turn off the webcam so that we can focus in on our presentation and maximize our screen. So give me just 1 second there. Okay, and everybody should be able to see my Church360 Ledger screen. I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to hide my toolbar so that, see if I can get that to work, and then that'll maximize my screen even more at that point. So, okay, so from there, we're going to go ahead and log in. Everybody who accesses Church360 Ledger is going to have their own Church360 site. I titled this one learn.360ledger.com. And everybody who logs into the software should have their own username and password. We urge people not to share usernames and passwords. So mine's rod.kiles@cph.org. That is my email address. Then I'm just going to go ahead and type in my password. If I forget my password, I can use the forgot your password link singular. And if I don't receive it, I can click on the link to find out more about what to do in situations where I don't receive the unlock instructions. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in, and then that's going to log me into the program. When I log into the program, it's going to land me here on the home screen. Lots of times I think about this as being like the transactions view, but we're going to land here on this screen, and inside this view, we're going to have our Omni bar at the top. That's a search bar, and it allows you to search throughout the program. There's also these little graphs, we call them mini graphs, and they allow you to drill down into accounts as well. So you can kind of drill into the categories and drill further down into accounts. So both of them are a quick way of finding an account that you're looking for. So let's go ahead and let's talk about transactions. So I'm going to change my date range here back to 2018 there. When it comes time to create a transaction, you'll use the new transaction button to start that transaction creation process. So I'm going to click on deposit here, and there are some things that are similar amongst all transactions, and I have a few slides here that I want to show. So and I just titled this section transactions, and there are similarities between all of the transactions, and you'll notice that very quickly that they kind of use the same form so that they can breed some familiarity amongst these transactions. So similarities, every transaction must have a date. So I've seen other softwares where a date can be added later on. When you're entering in transactions in the Church360 ledger, you must have a date. So you'll enter the date that that transaction has been set for. Every transaction has the option of including a descriptive memo. It basically allows you to type in and say something about that transaction. Now, it doesn't have line item descriptions. There's some programs that every single line of the transaction you can include a description. It doesn't have that, but you can include a descriptive memo. Every transaction will have a minimum of at least 2 line items. So Church360 Ledger works on fund accounting, and one of those principles is the fact that it's dual entry bookkeeping, where every transaction is going to have 2 line items. It's going to have a credit and a debit. It may have 20 line items, but at a minimum it has to have 2. And then our 4th bullet, the debits and credits must balance on all transactions. So if I have 20 line items, I could have 1 credit and 19 debits, or vice versa, but the total between the credits and debits must balance. Okay, so we're talking about debits and credits. Let's look at our debits and credits chart, our transaction chart. And in looking at that chart, and let me say this real quick, you may want to write this chart down if you don't already have it memorized or anything like that. I've been with the company a long time now, and still to this day, I keep this chart shrunken, minimized on a little piece of paper taped to the bottom of my monitor. And anytime I'm working with transactions that and if I have a question about the credits and debits, I simply take a look at this credits and debits chart. So I'll go through and I'll say, hey, if I'm increasing a asset account, which would be a checking account, it's going to be a debit. If I'm decreasing a checking account, it's going to be a credit. And these account types and their credits and debits work together. You'll kind of notice how income and expense, they're reversed. A credit increases and a debit. A credit increases an income account, and a debit increases an expense account. Liabilities and assets are reversed as well, debits and credits. The restricted funds are connected to our asset accounts, so they have the same increase and decrease credits and debits. And one other thing, and I don't think I specifically mentioned this yesterday, but it's definitely going to come into play here in the next few minutes, and that is the fact that when you're using restricted funds, you'll use the restricted fund in place of, we'll use a restricted fund in place of the asset account, and we'll be showing in full detail, but I'm just kind of dropping that piece of information right now so that when we show it here in a second, it'll make sense. So yes, Tammy had a question in the question box. Would be awesome if we could get a presentation slide after the event. And absolutely, Buffy is supposed to be sending out emails that have like the slides and the video. So you will receive that at the end of the session. Perfect. Okay, so there's another question also from Pat, which is timely as well. Why is the memo line so short? That's a really good question. I can't say why they picked the length of the memo line. If I had to speculate, if I just took a wild guess, you know, this isn't definitive or anything like that, but the memo line also shows on the bottom of your check. And going left or right on a check, you can probably only put so many characters before it runs into the Micker bar or some of the security things that are at bottom of the check. We can add in a suggestion or feedback, we call it feedback here, to increase the memo line if you'd like. But I think, this is my guess, but I think that the reason the memo line is short is because it's going to print on the bottom of the check and it might run into a piece of information that it shouldn't run into. So good questions. Okay, so debits versus credits. Note restricted funds are held in an asset account, or a restricted fund is held in an asset account, which is true. So the next slide, and we'll actually come back to that slide when we're doing our journal entries as well. So deposits. Deposits allow users to deposit money into an asset account. Examples of deposits are offerings, rental income, you can also say interest, etc. Those are going to be the ways that you're going to use deposits. These transactions are limited to assets and income accounts, and they do integrate with Church360 members as well. So when someone goes in and enters offerings into Church360 members, those offerings are put inside of a batch, and that batch is handed over to Church360 Ledger. So when thinking about, hey, using the two products, you know, the financial secretary is going to enter the offerings, or offering counters are going to enter offerings. There is like a handshaking process where that information is handed over to Church360 Ledger. And we're actually going to show that right now. So let's go ahead and switch screens here and go back to Church360 Ledger. So I'm going to close this deposit window. And when it comes to creating a deposit, there's two ways of doing so. You can click on New Transaction and go to Deposit, and that's the way you'll manually create transactions or manually start transactions. The other is you can click on the Pending Transactions icon, which kind of looks like a little plus piece of paper here. You can click on that icon, and it will show you the pending transactions. Now, here at the upper right of the pending transaction icon, it's going to say number 19. That's how many pending transactions I have. And all of my pending transactions are going to be offering batches that have been passed over from Church360 members. Now, that number can, like when you're starting with Church360 members of Ledger, that number could be really high. Like mine was 400 yesterday. So I dismissed all of those besides these 19. And if you're not going to use an offering batch from Church360 members, you can just use the X to dismiss those. And they actually dismiss pretty quick. You can basically just click on them and they'll dismiss. So I actually clicked on the icon below there. But they dismiss pretty quick. So if there's a lot of them, you can just wipe those out. Now, if you want to use that deposit, you'll click on anywhere here on the row, pretty much. I guess you can't click right there, but anywhere on the wording and on the button, besides the X, and I guess this little spot in between, and then that will open up that deposit. Now, in working with deposits, basically you're going to be assigning your asset here on the left-hand side and your income accounts here on the right-hand side. So I always start at the top, and this is going to be our Sunday offerings. And I'll make sure to select the correct date. So if you're entering into the system, most of the times it'll come over as Sunday, but the deposit probably was made on Monday. So I'm going to switch it from the 15th to the 16th. Then from there, The next question is, why can't we see the original 19 transactions that you had? Oh, good question. I think it's Tony there. Tony, it only shows 5 at a time. So if you go through and click on the X, it'll dismiss them. And if you click on the row, it'll allow you to actually view the contents of that deposit. So that's what's going on there. So Sunday offerings, you do have the option for a payee. On the left-hand side, you'll select your asset account. Now, since we're using restricted funds, I'm going to need to select my restrictions accordingly. So like I'll go to unrestricted, and that'll be all the money that's going to be in my general fund. And then if I'm restricting money, I'm going to select each one of my restrictions. So building fund, mission fund, and youth fund. There we go, youth. And when you're selecting these items here, you can type a few letters in the field, and that will filter your list as well. So, so over here on the right, we know we want to restrict the money for the building fund, for the mission fund, and for the youth fund, and the money for the general fund is going to be unrestricted. So when it starts out, it's going to assign the amounts accordingly. So the amounts we're seeing here on the right-hand side, those are the amounts that were given to the building fund, the general fund, the mission fund, and the youth fund, and those total to $6,800. But we need to reassign the amounts accordingly. So like the $6,800, that's not how much is going into the restricted fund. I'm going to delete that amount, and it's going to put the $6,800 down here at the bottom. And basically $5,000 is going into the unrestricted portion of our central trust checking. The building fund is going to be $300. The mission fund is going to be $1,000, and the youth fund is going to be $500. And every time that I type an amount, it does subtract it from the balance down here at the bottom. And the next question, or another question, came from Pat. Hello, Pat. Nice to hear from you. Is it important to put a certain account first for the deposit? And the answer to that is no. Whatever order you put here is fine. So if I started out with building fund at the top, it'll still show up correctly on our reports, our balance sheets, and statement of income and expense throughout our software. So it's not important which one. I usually put the unrestricted first because that's the largest amount. But then from there, I'll just select them and, I guess how I feel that day. So, okay. So after I've selected my restrictions here on the left, those are going to total to our $6,800. Then for income, even though it has the little bubble or button there that's showing for the building fund, we'll still need to select our account. So we still need to fill in our income account. So building fund, general fund, mission fund, and youth fund, our youth group fund here. So once I've selected that, I'll go through and I'll review the rest of my transaction. I'll make sure that everything's correct. All my dollars have been assigned, and I'll click save down at the bottom. And when I save it, it's just going to insert that deposit here into our home screen or inside of our transactions view. And you'll be able to see here on this main screen all of our assets and or liabilities. So we'll be able to see the $5,000 that went into checking. Or actually, all of this went into checking because all of these items are part of our checking account. But we'll be able to see the $5,000 that went into unrestricted, the $300 that went into our building fund, the $1,000 that went into the mission fund, and the $500 that went into the youth fund. So you'll kind of notice how when I hover over this deposit that it all highlights in this kind of tealish color. And that's to let me know that that is one transaction. If I go down, you'll notice how this is just one line. That's one transaction. And whenever there's multiple lines, both those lines will highlight at the same time. So, and then this Missouri Department of Revenue, that income tax, that's actually a liability account. So, okay, so in looking at this, we can see our transaction, our deposit. Just to mention, this number here at the right is going to be like a fund balance. So it's going to be your total assets minus your liabilities, and that's how it comes up with the 381,000 there. Okay, so that's how you'll integrate between Church360 members and Church360 Ledger. It'll be by clicking on a transaction and pulling that over. If you don't need that transaction, you can just dismiss that transaction. So that's strictly up to the treasurer. There are churches who, instead of pulling the transaction over from Church360 members, they'll just go to new transaction. And once they're under new transaction, they'll just create their new transaction. So they'll go to deposit. Inside of here, they'll fill in a memo, and I'm just going to duplicate the one that I just did. So I'll say Sunday offerings, 415, and I'll select unrestricted. I'll select my building fund, my mission fund, and I'll select my youth fund. There we go. And on the right-hand side, I'll select my general fund, my building fund. Here we go. My mission fund and my youth fund. And I guess to speak to what Pat was saying just a minute ago, or asking just a minute ago, I guess mentally I do kind of line these up so they are across from each other. So the order that you select isn't necessarily important, but visually it is easier to see when you align them left to right like that. So this would be $5,000. This building fund would be $300. Mission fund would be $1,000, and youth fund would be $500. And then I would repeat those amounts over here. So 5,000, building fund 300, mission fund 1,000, and youth fund 500. So then at that point I could save it, and I'm just going to actually put duplicate in my memo here, so that I'll be able to kind of tell the difference between the two, since I'm creating the same transaction to show the different ways of entering it in. So it could be pulling it over from Church360 members, or it could be manually typing that item in. So there's a duplicate thing there. Okay, so that's how you can enter in a deposit. The next type of transaction that I want to show, so first, of course, we want to have money in the bank before we spend money. Let's take a look at checks. So let's take a look at entering checks into the system. So what we're going to do is, to create a check, we're going to click the new transaction here at the top, and we're going to click the check button. And when we click on checks, then that is going to allow us to actually create our check. So let me just move my notes over here. There we go. Okay, so in working with checks, it's going to have a very similar form, except for we're actually going to see a check blank here in the middle. And when you enter a check into the system, you're going to select the memo, enter in a payee, enter in a check number, then fill in your assets and your liabilities. So the check that I want to enter in, I'm going to enter in a couple of checks. And one scenario is going to be entering in a check that I'm going to print from the system through like our LaserJet printer. And the other scenario is going to be the fact that you may be handwriting checks, so you may not print checks at all. So the first check, we're going to say that this is like a payroll check. And with the payroll check, we can go through and type in payroll check. We can say payroll check for pastor, or it could be for anybody, I guess, technically. But basically, we're trying to represent a payroll check here. Now, when you're dealing with your payroll checks, let's select pastor. We're going to say Pastor Kent Williams. So Pastor Kent Williams. Looks like he's not in our drop list. Now, when it comes to payees, if you have them already entered into the system, then they'll appear here in our drop list. And I want to type in Pastor Kent Williams. And then at this point in time, you can either enter the check number, but there is also an option to add the check number later on down the line. There is a question from Julie here. Let me just read that outline. I usually put the total of the assets on the left and expense on the right, not on both sides. Is that wrong? Could you explain that question just a little bit further, like the type of transaction that you're creating there and the reason for being? And I'll answer that right after I enter this transaction here. Okay. Okay, so assets. So here on the left-hand side, I'm going to select assets and liabilities. And on the right-hand side, there'll be expense or liabilities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in and say that I'm going to pay pastor out of unrestricted, and then I'm going to fill in any of the liabilities or taxes that have to be paid. And actually, I'm going to switch this from pastor to Derek Woods here, because there are scenarios where pastors do not pay taxes. So since I definitely want to show that we're show how to enter taxes onto checks. So payroll check for Derek Woods. We're going to say unrestricted, and then we're going to enter in these payroll taxes. And for our payroll taxes, we're going to select our federal income tax. We're going to select our state income tax. We're also going to select our Social Security, and we're going to select our Medicare. Now, if you're in the process of selecting these accounts, and you find out that there's an account that's not here in the list, you can click the X here on the right-hand side and close it, enter in the account in the chart of accounts view, then come back and just finish entering in the transaction. So on the left-hand side, it's going to have our assets and our liabilities. And then on the right-hand side, this is going to be our expenses. So we have a staff salary account that we're going to use. So the total amount of the check, the gross, will go into the salary line over here on the right-hand side. And then over here on the left-hand side, this is going to be each one of the other amounts, like the amount, like the net for the check, $652.48, the federal income tax, which is $95.10, the state income tax, which is going to be $22, Social Security, which is going to be $51.67, and Medicare, which is going to be $12.08. So that worked out perfect there. And when we get to the end, there should be a zero amount at the bottom of both. Also, when you look down at the bottom, there's going to be credits and debits here as well. So I do want to show the slide that I created for checks here inside of the system so that we can review that. So with checks, they do allow users to print checks or record handwritten checks. They're used for paying payroll or paying your church bills. They can be used to, or you can print either through a laser or an inkjet printer. And if you wanted to order checks, you would do that through formsplusinc.com. So I'm just going to click on that link there. And basically with Forms Plus, we've worked with them for years, and you can go to their website, you can click on checks, and then that will allow you to see the different style checks. And it could be a middle check or a top check, whichever you prefer. If you converted from Shepherd Staff, you can use the Shepherd Staff middle checks. If you look closely, you can kind of tell they're identical. So we wanted to make sure that we could, transfer those customers over if they decided that they wanted to use Church360 Ledger. So, but it is formsplusinc.com. So let's go back to Church360 Ledger. And when you're inside this view, once you've reviewed your check, if you have the check number, say it's a handwritten check, you'll just type the check number in. The little exclamation point is just kind of, to draw your eye to that part of the check so that you can review the amount of the check before you save it. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save here. And once I click Save, it's going to insert that check here into the system, and it's going to say Derek Woods. And you're going to notice a little icon here on the left-hand side, and that's the first time we've seen an icon in this left panel. And that icon is to let us know that the check is unprinted. So if we're scrolling through this list and we see checks that are unprinted, then we're going to want to go into our pending transactions view and print that check. Now, before we print this check, I do want to add one more check. So right now it's saying we have one pending check in our pending queue here, our pending check queue. So I'm going to go to new and I'm going to go back to checks. Now I showed how to enter in a check that we would print from the system. Let me go ahead and show how to enter in a check that would just simply be a handwritten check. And that check is going to be myself paying either the gas bill or like an electric bill or something like that. So I'm going to say that we're going to pay a gas bill. So gas bill for, this is April, so let's say that this is March. Okay, so I can type in my memo and I can say gas bill for March. I can select my payee, and it's actually, it used to be Laclede in our area, but now it's Spire, but I'll go ahead and use Laclede. And since the vendor or the payee is already in the system, then I can just select it from the drop list. If it's a handwritten check and I know the number of that check, I could type in the number of the check at that point. Then from there, enter in my asset account on the left, which is going to be Laclede. Let's say the gas bill was $378. Then on the right-hand side, I can select my either liability or expense account. This is going to be an expense account, and it's going to be our natural gas account here. So 378, 378. We only have 2 line items for this account. And then I can click Save, and it will save that account into the system. Tony asked the question, would Ledger consider adding a self for invoice number instead of using the memo line? That is something they can consider. We'll make sure to pass that on. Julie did post a follow-up concerning the question she was asking. So she said, I usually put the total of the asset on the left and expense on the right side. On the right, not on both sides. Is that wrong? And I better understand you're saying that that's a deposit. And it is not wrong. When you're working with that transaction, it's basically the left-hand side is all of your assets. And if you're restricting that money, then you'll have more than one asset on the left. And then on the right, it's going to be your income in a deposit. So, but if it was, I guess, another transaction type, then like a check, it could be expenses on the right. The only time you'll have more than one item on the left when dealing with a deposit or a check or a payment is if you're going to have a restricted fund, or you're going to have more than one checking account on the left-hand side. So it's not necessarily wrong. It's just how you have your chart of accounts set up. And you're probably not using restricted funds since you only have the one item on the left-hand side. Okay, good question. Okay, so once we enter our checks into the system, they're going to go into our queue here, our print queue. And you'll notice we have 2 of them here at the upper right. So I need to refresh my screen since I just added in that additional check. And if we enter a check number, it will show a check number. If we didn't enter a check number, then it's not going to show a check number. So if this is a handwritten check, like we did for Laclede Gas, then we'll check the little box and we'll simply mark it as printed. And then so mark as printed, one check will be removed from the print queue, and we'll say confirm, and then it will simply remove that check from the print queue. It'll mark it as printed and remove it from the print queue. If this is a check that we want to print out on form paper or a check blank, then we'll check the little box and we'll say print. From there, we'll be able to see our check or checks, and it will go ahead and assign the check the next highest check number. So we just used check number 1234. So the next check number, let me move my mouse off of it, is going to be 12345. And I'm going to give up on trying to highlight that. So the next check number is going to be 12345. And we're using a 3-part check, and the check is actually in the middle, and it shows the total amount of the transaction there. So from there, what we need to do is at the upper right of the window, it's going to say print. and we'll click print. And then if we have multiple checks, it'll actually allow us to change the check numbers at this point in time. So if this check number is incorrect, we could just change the check number. I'm going to say that it is correct, but it'll have all of your checks listed here. If you had 10 checks, there would be 10 checks in this area, and you could just make sure that the checks have the correct number. So then at that point, I'll click confirm. It'll take me over to the print window for Church360 Ledger. And it's for the web browser as well. Then inside of this print window, I'll review it one last time. If there's more than one check, I can scroll up and down to see those additional checks. Then I'll simply click print, and it will send the check over to the printer. Then I'll retrieve the check from the printer, make sure that it looks correct. If it doesn't look correct, then I'll click on print again, and I'll go through the print process. So, I'll just go through that print process until it's correct. If it is correct, then I'll check the box and I'll say mark as printed and click confirm, and then it'll take it out of my print queue. So that's how it'll work. Now, when you're inside of this view, whatever order the checks are inside of this view is the order that the checks are going to print. I was just talking to one of my associates today about that. And so when you enter your checks, they're going to go into the print queue in the order that you enter your checks into the system. And then once they're in here, they'll print in this order. Now, if you're wanting to print them in a different order, you could select certain checks and then print those checks. When you're in the print window, you could tell it, hey, I only want to print page 2 and 4 instead of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So there are some different controls for like the order of printing, but whatever order you enter them into the system, that's the order that they're going to print from the system. Okay, there is a question that came in from Pat, a couple questions. Is there a way to get your series of check numbers in there automatically? Whenever you switch over to the print button, it'll automatically pull that check number in, whichever the next one is. If you're having problems with that, we can set up a phone call and we can dig into that further. Also, can you get the check numbers to be consecutive rather than by date? And they should be consecutive as well. So we might just need to take a look at what's going on with your system and get that fixed for you. Okay, so we've gone through and printed checks. The next transaction, I kind of think of it as the counterpart to checks, is going to be payments. So inside of Church360 Ledger, and actually I want to go back to the home screen here just for a second to show that those additional, that those checks are here inside of the system. But what I think of as the counterpart to checks is going to be payments. So for years and years and years, we all wrote checks, but now we have ways of electronically electronically printing or electronically paying people. So like we go to our bank website and we pay people. We go to a website and we pay people. So basically you can electronically pay people. Like if you have a credit card payment, you go to that bank or you go to that website and you pay that credit card bill. Or like with me with my gas bill, I actually go to the website and I pay the gas bill. So if that's the case, instead of entering a check, you're actually going to enter in a payment. And so let's duplicate our gas bill. So we wrote a check. Let's show that same process. So say that this is the gas bill for April, which is actually March. So for March, we can select the day. The payee still could be Laclede. The assets still would be unrestricted for $378, and the expense still would be our natural gas account here. You'll notice that there's no check number box here on the right-hand side. So as soon as we save that transaction, it doesn't go into the print queue. it actually goes directly here into our home screen, our transactions view. And it says payment instead of check, and it's considered to be an electronic form of paying people. So let me go ahead and show the slide for payments. And when it comes to payments, payments allow users to record online or electronic transactions. They are limited to assets, liabilities, and expense account types. And examples are going to be EFTs for utility bills, like we showed, and a gas bill. It could also be payments for bank fees, etc. So, you know, if you have a checking account that has a bank fee, you might want to enter that in as a payment. You could also enter that in as a journal entry, and that would allow us to, or we could also enter that in as a journal entry, and I'm going to show that here in just a little bit. But so there's a couple ways of entering in bank fees, but that's what payments allow you to do. So after payments, the next type of transaction that I want to show is going to be transfers. And transfers allow us to transfer money from one account to another account. So when it comes to transfers, transfers are used to represent electronic transfers between banks and to make line item corrections. That is not true. I'm sorry. Transfers are used to transfer money between bank items. Oh, that is a true statement. Retract my retraction there. That is a true statement. So if you make a mistake on a line item, you select the wrong expense account, you can use a transfer to transfer money from that one expense account to another expense account. So they are used to make line item corrections as well. So when you're working with transfers, they only allow you to move money between similar account types. So I was just explaining, hey, you know, it's transferring money from one expense account to another expense account. The same thing would be from one bank to another bank. So transfers allow you to transfer money between similar account types. So let's go back to Church360 Ledger here, and we're going to go to new transaction, and we're actually going to do a transfer. It's the first one here inside of our drop list. So when working with a transfer, that's going to look like this. And there's a couple transfers that I want to show. One is transferring money between bank accounts, but also it's setting up the balances for our unrestricted accounts. If, say, you're transferring money from savings to checking, reverse that, from checking to savings, then you can go into your memo and you can say transfer from checking to savings. And then from there, you can select on the left-hand side where the money is coming from. So we're going to say unrestricted checking. And then on the right-hand side, we're going to select our savings account, Central Trust Savings. So say it was just $5,000. So we'll say $5,000 from here, and then we'll put $5,000 over there in savings. So then at that point, I can click Save, and it will save that transaction. And for Central Trust Checking, that's going to, for Central Trust Checking, that's going to take $5,000 out. And for Central Trust Savings, that's going to put $5,000 in. And we can drill into that account. So we could go to Assets, we could go to Central Trust, and then we could see Checking, Central Trust Checking. One more click. Then over here on the right-hand side, you can see that it's decreased your balance by $5,000. So we're just looking at the checking account. You can also go to the Omni bar here at the top and savings. And then you can see the current balance now for savings is up to $66,000. So $66,600 there. Okay, so at that point, that's how you can use a transfer. The other form of transfer, and this one's probably on people's minds, at least when they're getting started with the software. I can go to transfer, and then when it comes to doing a transfer, I can transfer money from unrestricted into our restriction. So left-hand side is going to decrease unrestricted. So say that, let's see, I'm just going to say $3,000. So $3,000 out of unrestricted. On the right-hand side, I would select the restriction. So I'm going to put some into building fund, some into memorial fund, and some into our scholarship fund. So it instantly puts the 3,000 over here. If you take that out, it'll put the 3,000 down at the bottom. And let's say that it's 1,000 into the building fund, 1,000 into the memorial fund, and 1,000 into the scholarship fund. And these will now become a transaction that helps show our balance as being correct. So when you're starting out with the software, all of the money is going to be unrestricted inside of your checking account, but you'll need to do a transfer to transfer that money over. So I'm going to put this transaction on January 1, since we basically were saying that we're going to start on January 1. And then you would save it, and then that would basically be your initial balance for those restricted funds. So if I go into save, that'll save that item. And then if I went to my building fund for example, so it says asset, central trust, checking, and building here, then we started out at $1,000, and then we basically went up from there. The next, there's a question from Wendy, and good question. Can you not make corrections in the original transactions? Of course you can. And I'm going to show that here in a minute once I get done describing all of the transaction types. But, you know, if it's a transaction and it's from a prior fiscal year, or it's a transaction has been cleared, then you would use a transfer to make a correction to that transaction. And it would only be if you're making a line item type transfer. So you're reallocating the money and it wasn't allocated correctly in the first transfer or in the first transaction. Okay, so those are the two types of transfers there. Next, let's take a look at journal entries. And when it comes to journal entries, we're going to go back to our slideshow here. I've got a couple bullets for journal entries. Journal entries allow users to record account balances, account balance corrections, interest earned, and bank fees. And they can also utilize all four account types. So along this conversation we've been talking, I've been like, okay, well, on one side you can use this account, and on the other side you can use this account type. And you can only use these certain ones. Well, when you're working with journal entries, they allow you to use all account types. So if I needed to do interest earned, I could do that. If I need to do a correction, I could do that. So let's go back to our debits and credits chart here and just show that once again. And if you haven't written it down, or if you don't know it, you may want to take it. And I can pause for a second to give people a chance to write that down if they like. And I keep a chart here just so that I can reference it quickly. And when working with journal entries, there's going to be increases and decreases, and all the accounts don't increase and decrease the same way. It's just depending on, you know, the way accounting works, they will increase and decrease either with a credit or a debit. And let me mention one other thing, and I'm going to show the journal entries. Pat responded, hello, Pat, once again, not referring to the print queue, the ledger order. And I understand what you're saying now. Thanks for all the additional information there. Unfortunately, the order in the ledger view is the order that the items are entered, and at this time it can't be changed. There's not a way to sort it by check number. It's just basically whatever order it was entered into. Good observation there, Pat. Thank you. Okay, so inside this view, we can go to new transaction, and we can go to journal entry, and we have a few journal entries we're going to show. So the first one is going to be bank interest. So if this was the bank interest for, we can say that this is the bank interest earned for the month of March. So bank interest for March. Then from there, I could select the appropriate date. There's not a payee for bank interest or anything. Then I'll select unrestricted for my checking account, and then I'll select my interest income account for the offset. So basically with this transaction, there's just going to be two transactions. There's going to be a debit and a credit, and they're basically going to offset each other. So if our bank interest that we earned, say it was 29 cents, so with the asset account, you're going to debit that asset account. So we'll go back here just for a second. So to increase an asset account, it's going to be a debit. And when increasing an income account, it's going to be a credit. And you'll notice how this turns from red to green when it balances. So then at that point, you can just click save, and it would save that transaction. Wendy asked another question. She says, why are you not doing a deposit for the bank interest? And anytime I think about deposits, I think of them as actually literally being a deposit. And normally when I see bank interest on a bank statement, it's not a deposit. It's part of a separate section on the bank statement. And that's why I show the journal entry instead of the deposit. A deposit uses the exact same credits and debits. So when you do a deposit, it debits your bank account and it credits your income accounts. But when I think about bank interest, I don't think of that as being a deposit. But if you'd like, you can definitely use a deposit to represent your bank interest. They have the same credits and debits. They give you the same results. The only kind of like drawback, if you show a list of your deposits, then it includes bank interest as being a deposit instead of a journal entry. And if you were to total all your deposits on your bank statements and they aren't including interest as a deposit, then you'll have a difference. So that's the reason why I do it this way. Okay, so at this point, then I will click save, and it'll save my journal entry into the system, and we'll have our increase of 29 cents. Then, so that's bank interest. Bank fees, so I could use a journal entry for fees, and basically the same thing would apply for bank fees as well. You could enter that in as a check or a payment, but usually I do that as a usually I'll do that as a journal entry as well, because like when we're in here and we select unrestricted checking and then we select our bank fees, then to decrease the bank account is going to be a credit, and say the bank fees were $8.99. And then to debit and expense account, and let me show my chart here. Click over here. So to decrease a bank account is going to be a credit, and to increase an expense account is going to be a debit. So if we go back to our screen here, there we go. So credit, debit. And then these two balance out. Let me add in a memo. And these would be our bank fees for March. Then we can click save, and it would save that item into the system. So then at that point, you'd be able to see the increase for the interest and a decrease for the bank fees. So I think the only other use, well, maybe there's 2 or 3 other uses. So let me go to journal entry here, and if you had like a payroll transaction that was complex and it was electronic, you may want to use a journal entry, because you could enter in lump sums for all of your payees inside of a journal entry. That's one example. Another example is you could use it to transfer money between similar account types. So you could select central trust checking and building fund, and then just use the credits and debits as you would like. So I've seen lots of people do that when they're getting started with the software and they're familiar with journal entries. Okay, so that is journal entries, and that is the last of our transaction types. So let's go ahead, and it is 10:56. So let's go ahead and take our 5-minute intermission, And then when we resume, we'll come back and we'll show our managing transactions. So we'll show the editing transactions, we'll show voiding transactions, we'll also show recreating recurring transactions. We'll also show copying transactions. So, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our PowerPoint, and let's go to intermissions here. And open up the timer, and we'll take a short 5-minute break. And then when we reconvene, we'll jump into managing our transactions. So thank you everyone for your patience there. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining me. We'll be right back. Hmm. Hello, everyone. Somehow my alarm is continuing to alarm. Give me just 1 second. Okay, let's do a quick check just to make sure that you guys aren't hearing the alarm on your side. If somebody could post in the question box whether or not you guys are hearing the alarm through the system for some reason. I'm not sure why that alarm is still going off. No alarm. Okay, thank the Lord. Okay, so that worked out okay. So, okay, there were a couple questions that came in. And I think they're relevant. So I'm just going to go ahead and answer those now. There was a question from Tony. Hello, Tony. Are all your examples using just one checking account? And the answer to that question is yes. All of the transactions were just one checking account. You could use multiple checking accounts in these items. Like if you did a deposit and money was going to two separate banks, you could put two checking accounts in that deposit. And the reason why that's allowed is the system really works on line items. So like what you're seeing in here are all of the line items. And like even with this deposit, it's working on all of these line items. So yes, the answer to that is yes. The second, there's another question. Is it true that in Shepherd Staff, restricted funds were treated as liabilities and in Church360 Ledger, they are assets? And that is true. So like Shepherd Staff had dedicated accounts. The dedicated accounts, and I'm going to go back to, let me launch my PowerPoint here. So click here, F5, and display settings. We'll just switch this over here. And just to answer that real quick, we have customers converting from Shepherd Staff to Church360 Ledger. And lots of times the question, a very similar question to this is asked. And like liabilities, credits, and debits, a dedicated account, the same credits and debits, and the dedicated accounts would even show as part of liabilities on your balance sheet. So that is the truth. It's a change in way of reporting the information. So hopefully that answers your question there, Dave. And if not, of course, you can ask a follow-up there. But it is true. The restricted funds are considered assets, and the dedicated accounts were considered liabilities. Okay, so let's jump into managing our transactions. And there was another question that said show the slide for journal entries again. So I'll go ahead and show the slide for journal entries. So there's two things there: allowing users to record account balance corrections, interest earned, and bank fees, and then you can also utilize all four account types. Okay, so managing transactions. So inside of Church360 Ledger, there we go. So inside of Church360 Ledger, you can, you can correct transactions, you can void transactions, you can copy transactions. So if I'm in here and I'm working inside the system, and I'm going to scroll down through my list here, and I'm going to find this check for Timothy. So I guess the first one I'm going to show is copying a transaction. So if I entered a transaction into the system once before and I say, hey, you know, it's the same check, the same amount, and I want to use it again, I could click on that transaction. Then inside of the transaction, I can click on copy, and I can simply copy the transaction. So it'll take everything that was in my prior transaction, change the date. I could change the memo, so I could say salary for April. And then once I'm done making any changes, I can add line items, I could delete line items, I could change amounts if need be. So if his pay was more, I could change those amounts. But then I could just save the transaction, and it would save that into the system. It would put it into the print queue so that I could print the transaction. And it would also show here at the top with all my other transactions. So let me scroll down here to one of the transactions we created before. So say that I had created this deposit and it turned out that the deposit was off and I needed to correct the deposit. So this goes back to editing the transaction. So inside of here, you can just click anywhere on any of the line items for that transaction, and that will allow you to edit the transaction. And as long as it's inside the current fiscal year and it hasn't been reconciled, you can make changes to that transaction. So if I click on that transaction, and you want to click anywhere but the hyperlinks basically to open up that transaction. So once it's opened up, then at that point, say that it was really $6,000 to unrestricted and $6,000 to our general fund. You know, I could type in the corrected information, then I could amend the memo. I can add an amendment memo. So increased general fund to correct amount, increase general fund amount. So I ran out of characters there. So then click save, and then it creates that change inside of that transaction. And then let me scroll down here just a little bit, and you'll notice if you look real close, there's now a little triangle here on the right hand side. This transaction has been edited, and I can expand that, and I can at that point see when it was edited, the change that was made. So it went from 5,000 to 6,000, and that was an increase of $1,000 at that point in time. So I can see those changes at that point in time. So if I enter in a transaction and say that transaction is so messed up that I just simply need to void that transaction. So I can click on the deposit, and then I can click on void, and then that will allow me to void that transaction. So it is going to have like a sanity or a like a double check to make sure this is really what you want to do. So if it is, you'll confirm your void, and it'll just void it at that point in time. Now, it'll show with the little, I call that a Ghostbuster symbol, but it's kind of like the little no symbol, and it'll show that voided transactions. Debbie asked the question, can you hide voided transactions? At this time, the voided transactions cannot be hidden. We can add in feedback for that if you'd like for us to pass that on to the managers, programmers, developers, those people. But at this time, it shows the voided transactions. It's really keeping a running balance of everything that's going on. When you void a transaction, and actually I have a slide for voided transactions. So let me show that voided transaction. Voiding a transaction cancels the effect of a transaction. So it basically reverses the transaction. It creates a hidden reversing transaction and groups the two transactions together. So that's why it cannot be undone at this point in time. And they do show throughout the software. I am going to show a report here in just a minute and show exporting it and taking out the line items. But at this point in time, they can't be hidden, unfortunately. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to Church360 Ledger, and we showed deposits, we showed voiding. Let me go back into, and let me select I want to select, we selected Timothy, so we'll select Pastor Kent's check this time. So if I click on that check and say that I have this transaction here in the system, and I want to I want to make it recurring. So just a minute ago, I showed the copy option. Like if you want to copy a check, you'll go in here, you'll click on copy, and it will say you're creating a copy of the check. So it'll actually create the copy of the check at that point in time. So I'm gonna close that and not save it. But if I save it, it'll actually create that transaction in the system. If this is going to be something that's very similar every 2 weeks or every month or whatever the time period is, I can make it recurring. So I can go to make recurring, and I can name the transaction. So I'm going to say this is pastor's salary. And instead of every single week, every other week on Tuesday, then I can click save, and it will actually create that transaction, and it will move it into our recurring transaction part of the program. So if we go to the gear and go to recurring transactions, then we'll have a recurring transactions, and the recurring transactions will generate on their own. So that recurring transaction will show underneath here when it's time for it to appear. So it'll show with our other pending transactions. And if we need to edit that transaction, we can just click on the transaction and make changes. If we no longer need the transaction, then we can just use the circle minus and we can delete that transaction. So with recurrent transactions, the thing that I've noticed is that you just want to be careful about deleting items from the pending transactions, because I've heard from a couple customers where they're like, it's not there. And then we talk to the programming team and they're like, well, it shows that it was deleted on this date. So we want to be careful about deleting items from here and, instead of possibly using them, because if you delete them, they're gone. And basically you'll have to go back and enter in that transaction. Okay, so let me go ahead. That's recurring transactions. So we've talked about managing transactions, copying, editing, voiding. Let's take a look at our reports. So inside of Church360 Ledger, there's several different types of reports. And the majority of the reports that you're going to find are going to be underneath the reports icon. It's the one that looks like a little notebook. And with the notebook, I can select one of the reports that I want to see. So I'm going to go to the general ledger report. And with the general ledger report, it's going to show us all of our line items inside of this, inside of the system. So it's literally showing every single line item. And from there, we can filter and we can group. So the little down triangle represents filtering. And that allows you to filter by type, by payee, by account, and just those three: type, payee, and account. So if I just wanted to see all of my checks, I could say type is check. Then I could select the accounts that tie into my checking account. So if I'm just using a single account, like it's Central Trust Savings, I could uncheck this. And I could go to Central Trust Savings, and then this would be all the checks that are showing in Central Trust Savings. But if I'm using something that has restricted funds, I'll say unrestricted, then I'll select the offsets or the restricted funds as well, because those are going to have line item in money that relates to the checking account. So in looking at this, if we wrote a check and it was just out of unrestricted, it's just going to show that item. But if we wrote a check and it had multiple items, multiple lines, like some was paid out of building and some was paid out of unrestricted, then there would be two lines. And a good example of that, or maybe a better way of showing that in our system with the data that we have, is our deposits. So like deposits, we had 5,000, 300, 100, and 500, and that was all one deposit. So that's our Sunday offerings deposit. It does show the voided items in, like, I guess, a reddish or pinkish color here. So those are included. and basically it just keeps that running total. So, you know, if you're just using the one bank line, then that'll be the total. If not, then you'd have to add the lines together to get the total for the deposit. Okay, so this does allow you to narrow the report down just to see the types of transactions that you want. You can group by payee, or you could group by account. You can only group by one at a time. So if we are looking at this and we scroll down, it'll show the ones that don't have a payee first, but then when you get to the bottom, there's going to be the ones that do have payees, and it'll group those items together. And if you were just looking for certain ones, you could click on the little triangle here and you could say uncheck the ones that don't have payees. And then these would be all of your payees here inside of the system and all of their transactions. Wendy asked the follow-up question, why can't we filter on correction? That's a good question. We'll add that in as feedback. And I'm not sure why they didn't add that in. It might have been something that just didn't cross their minds, or there may be a reason for being, but I can add that in as feedback. We can add that in. Okay, so in looking at this, we have all of our transactions based on payee. You can do the same for account as well. So if you're trying to see everything grouped by account, it'll start with unrestricted, and then from there, oh, I didn't have the grouping icon. Groupings on account. Oh, let's see, click here. And this is just unrestricted and restricted. So I'm going to check all here to add in a few more. So grouping by federal income tax, and grouping by gas, then grouping by health insurance, then grouping by housing. And it's grouping by each one of those accounts, and it's showing the transactions inside of those accounts. So this is the general ledger report. Earlier I was talking about, let me go back here and uncheck all one more time. Earlier I was talking about the ability to eliminate those items inside of or through the process of exporting. So there is a way, like we went to unrestricted and checked these, and we switched this to deposit. So deposit. There we go. Okay, so deposit, we're grouping by account. Let me reset this here real quick to get all my information back. All ungroup, there we go. So, okay, so 415 is our deposit. So I'm gonna filter by deposit. And then I'm going to, if I want to exclude the items that are voided, basically the information can be exported to Excel, and then those items can be excluded. So export to Excel, I'll double click down here. Okay, let me drag this over here and enable editing. And then from there, you'll be able to see the items that are voided. And basically, you could just highlight and delete those. And then this could be printed as a report at that point in time. So, and I guess you could also sort all your voided ones together and then delete those. And then that would be your report as well. So all of the reports inside of the system can be exported to Excel and modified if there was some type of tweak you wanted to make to the report. That was one of the main things they wanted to do is, provide reports, but also give people the ability to make changes to those reports in Excel, since Excel is pretty popular and universal in lots of cases, or some form of spreadsheet program is universal in most scenarios. So there is a print button that allows you to print these reports. And it just basically takes all the information that's on your view and allows you to allows you to print that information out, so you can scroll through the different pages. So let me cancel that. So now that we have this report, you can export it, print it. You can also filter by month and day, by year, just depending on what you want to see inside of your report. If you're not doing one of the predefined areas, you can type in a date range that you would like. So if it's not one of the ones that are, I guess, kind of square, then you could just type in whatever numbers you want and show whatever date range you'd like to see at that point. Okay. So let me click here. That's the general ledger report. After the general ledger report, there is, I'm going to go to these two, then come back to statement of income and expense. And there is the balance sheet report. The balance sheet report is going to show all of your assets and liabilities. In this report, it does show starting balance, ending balance, debits versus credits, your change plus minus and change percent. You'll notice that it remembers the date range that I selected just a minute ago. So as you navigate through the program, if you set a date range, it's going to hold on to that date range. Then at this point, you can collapse areas that you may or may not want to show. Anytime you're generating and creating reports, you do want to think about your audience. So depending on the report, they may just want to see the amounts that are in checkings, in your checking or savings accounts. So the whole setup process is really important. You can shorten your reports quite a bit by collapsing the items. So down at the bottom, it's going to have assets less liabilities. So it'll kind of give you the difference between the two, starting balance, ending balance, and then change, and kind of whether or not you're plus or minus above or below there. So that's the balance sheet report. You'll notice that the balance sheet report does not show restricted funds. So let me expand that there. So all of that money does roll into Central Trust checking. To be able to see the restricted funds, you would go to reports and you would go to the chart of accounts report. So the balance sheet report and the chart of accounts report, those two reports are very similar in form. So like when you're looking at the chart of accounts report, not to be confused with the chart of accounts view, but when you're looking at the report, there's going to be the same column headers that are showing here. But you can also see the restricted funds and see the credits and debits. The chart of accounts report is kind of like your, which could be your trial balance report, since it shows your credits and debits for every single account inside of the system. The same rules would apply for eliminating stuff you didn't want to see. So if you wanted to see your restricted funds and your assets and your liabilities, you could export this information to Excel. Then open the chart of accounts report and give it just a second there. And there we go. So then you could enable editing. And like when you're inside these views, they look like they're just numbers, but they're really formulas, and you can say more like they're, adding cells together. So assets is one section, liabilities is another section. And if you didn't want income and expense, you could literally hide those areas and delete them, just highlight to eliminate that you don't want that on the report and delete. Then it would just show your assets and liabilities, and it would include your restricted funds at that point in time. So, and I guess, you could say you could, if you didn't want to see debits and credits, you could eliminate those as well. So there are some merged cells here at the top. So you may want to unmerge those cells, and then say you wanted to get rid of the debits and credits, you can just delete those, and then at that point, you could just print the report. So you could go to File and go to Print and just print the report from the system at that point. So that's just one way of tweaking the reports and eliminating unnecessary information. So in looking at this report, you'll notice that the check numbers do appear here. So, but if you go back and you look at our preview, like our setup here, it's not showing the account numbers. I said check numbers, account numbers. So in looking at this, it's showing the account numbers here, and it doesn't show here unless you put it inside of the name. So that's one little note to make. If you want the account numbers to show everywhere throughout the software, you're going to want to put it inside with the name. And you can use any kind of format that you wanted to. If you wanted it to have the parentheses around it, like this doesn't have the parentheses because I didn't type them. But if you wanted to have the parentheses around it, you could just type that as part of the name. Okay, so I'm going to close the chart of accounts report, and let's take a look at the statement of income and expense. So I'm going to go to reports and go to statement of income and expense, and this is going to show all of our income and expense accounts. And I also want to take 2 or 3 minutes here, and I know we're cutting close on time. It's almost 11:30 now, but we probably still have another 15, 20 minutes worth of material here. So if you have to drop off, that's perfectly fine. Feel free to do so. We will be emailing out a copy of the webinar at the end of the session. So I'll download it and upload it to YouTube, and it'll be shared amongst everybody. So if you have to drop off, feel free to do so, but we probably have about another 20 minutes here. Okay, so yesterday when we were talking, I went through and I was like, okay, you can create budgets, and then there's a copy and paste thing. And when I was copying and pasting, the numbers weren't showing as I expected. So I went back and did a little research on that. And I want to show that because we're looking at income and expense are, I guess, tied to budgets. Like anytime you're dealing with your income and expense, you're also thinking about your budgets. So I'm going to go to the gear, and I'm going to go to budgets. And inside of our budgets view, this is going to show us all of our budgets, and they could be numbers that we've entered in. They could be last year's budgets or last year's actuals. Either you have the choice of using any of those options, and you could just make up your own budget and type those in. And yesterday I was going through and I was typing in a budgeted amount, and I did 300,000 for general fund, and I didn't change any of the other ones. And I think that's where my confusion came in. So like if I say vacation Bible school is 400, and then education is 800, and music ministry is 500, it'll automatically divide the amounts here on the right-hand side. So I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom and save those changes. And then once they're saved, then scroll back up to the top, and all of our numbers are going to make sense at that point in time. So then I'm going to export this to Excel. And the thing I'm trying to show is that you can export your budgets to Excel, and you can actually manage them in Excel if you'd like. You can tweak them, and you can do calculations, and you can email the budget report to other people. They can make changes. They can email it back to you. Then you could copy that information and paste it back into the view. And where my mistake happened yesterday was I went in here and I made a change, and then when I copied the sheet and pasted it back into here, the change that I made was literally getting overwritten because I only made a change here in the dollar amount. So say I change this 300, and I'm going to keep going up, $350,000. If I copy the whole sheet, then it's going to look at these 25,000s over here, sum them up, and dump that into the total amount. And that's where my mistake came from. So I'll change that to 500 and change this one to 900 so that we can see a few of them there. So basically what I can do is I can copy this whole section, and I have the choice of either copying and pasting the totals, or I have the choice of copying and pasting the monthly amounts. So I have to decide one or the other on how I want to do that. And if I do both, the monthly amounts will overwrite the total amounts, making it look like nothing has happened at that point in time. So either you're going to copy the whole sheet, or you're just going to copy totals, and that's where my hiccup happened yesterday. Sorry for the confusion on that. I wanted to make that right, though. There's a question from Dave. A good question, Dave. Thank you. And are account numbers required for all accounts? And the answer to that question is no. I'm beginning to notice people kind of moving away from account numbers and just using the names. And I'm kind of stuck in the middle. I'm kind of showing account numbers and showing names and showing all the possibilities. But unless your church really wants the account numbers and there's some type of benefit to them, most people don't know the account numbers, and those account numbers really don't provide a whole bunch of additional information except for the treasurer and a few people who work closely with the treasurer. But everyone else, they just look at the names and say that, hey, this is the total amount that's been budgeted for ministry, or the total amount that was spent on ministry. So good question. Okay, so now that we have our budgets in the system, we've shown the copy and paste, and we've shown saving, we can go back to reports and we can print our statement of income and expense. So the statement of income and expense report compares how much money was brought in, your revenues basically, versus your expenses, the amount of money going out, your expenditures. So in looking at this report, it's going to show our budgets, actuals, percent of budget, and remaining. And I mentioned saving, but I did not save my $350,000. So you'll notice that my budget here for the general fund is $300,000. So when it comes to budgets, please remember to save, because if you don't save and you navigate away or the computer shuts down, then those budgets are lost. So, okay, so inside of this view, it does use the date range selector, or the date picker here at the upper right, and it will show you the budgets, actuals, percent of budgets, and remaining for whatever time period you have selected. And a question that we get quite often is there a way to show the annual budgets and the monthly amounts at the same time? And the only way to do that is to export these reports to Excel and then combine the two together. So if you set this to all of 2018, yep, there we go. And we went to export to Excel. Give that just a second. So that's income expense 1. And then if we selected the month that we wanted, so let's say we're going to do the end of February. I know we have transactions through that time period. There we go. And then we exported that one, export to Excel. And that's going to be income and expense 2 there. So I'm going to open up income and expense 2, and I'm going to open up income and expense 1. So I'm going to click on both of those reports, and it'll take just a second for those reports to appear here. There we go. So I'm going to enable editing on both of those reports. And I'm basically going to pin them left or right here. There we go. So I'm going to use the snap to pin those. Then at that point here on the right, I have the annual. So actually, I'm going to reverse those. I'm going to pin that. Okay. So then at that point, usually what I'll do is I'll unmerge my headers here at the top. So I'll use the merge center and just basically unmerge those. And unmerge. There we go. So then all of the rows are going to be the same. So if we export the report, then it'll have the same columns. Then I can delete the information that I don't want. So if I don't want, say I just want budget actuals, and then I want budget actuals for the whole year, I can go over here and I can just delete these rows. And then I could copy these 2 rows and paste those into here. So I'm going to maximize this window now, and this is going to be budget for February, actuals for February, and this is going to be budgets for 2018 and actuals for 2018. And at that point, I'm done. So then I could just file and save, or I could print, whatever I wanted to do. And if I wanted each month, I could export each month, and then I can combine them together. Now, sometimes people will say, they say, hey, I don't want the restricted income on this report. So, I just want this to be, kind of like profit and loss, not restricted because they're saying that doesn't count. So you can delete these rows. So right click and delete, and that will get rid of all the restricted. And when that happens, it makes a change to your formula. So like if we have the reference here, that reference is broken, so some are missing, then at that point we can just delete the REFs at the end. And it will create that, then it will fix those. And usually at that point, I'll just click on the little square here and drag it, and then drag it over. So I only have to fix it for one, and then I'm basically copying and pasting or dragging to move that formula over to the other. And then at that point in time, I'm done. So they are tweakable and modifiable. There's just a little bit of Excel knowledge that's needed at that point in time. Okay, so, and then I can file and save that report. So I'm going to close that. Don't save. I'm going to close this as well. So you can also use the triangles here on the left-hand side to collapse those areas. So if, you know, it's a report that is only being seen by certain people and they don't want to see, you know, 200 lines, you can collapse them and they'll reduce your lines quite a bit at that point in time. It'll really help out in the presentation of the report. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and that's the last report that I wanted to show. So I want to go ahead and show our bank account reconciliation. So to do your bank account reconciliation, you'll drill into the checking account that you want to reconcile. So most cases, what I'll do is I'll go to the Omni bar and I'll just type in the name of my checking account. And then that allows me to just select the checking account. So and once I'm there, there's going to be a reconcile button. And if not, I can go to assets and I can click there. Then I can go into the category, Central Trust, and click there. Then I can click on checking. Then I can click on Central Trust checking, and that'll take me to the same place. It's typically easier if you know the name just to type the name into the box. But if not, you can drill into that account. So then at that point, you're going to select the correct date range that includes all of your transactions for this reconciliation. The bank account reconciliation is basically a calculator. It's taking the starting balance and ending balance from your bank statement, and it's applying all the transactions that you've entered into the system. So as long as we've entered all our transactions and they are correct, then the bank account reconciliation should go pretty smoothly. Excuse me just one second. Excuse me, thank you. Okay, so at this point, usually it's not just going to be 30 days. You'll have to, you know, go back in time some to catch some of the checks that were written before the start of that bank statement and took time to clear. So we'll go to 1/5/2018. So 1/5/2018 through 2/28/2018. So that will limit some of the transactions that I'm seeing. So then at that point, I'll do reconcile. The statement date should be the end date for the end date for your bank statement. So 28, there we go. And then the starting balance, that's going to be starting balance on your statement. So 167,073.86. And then the ending balance is going to be 165,393.42. And all of these will come from your bank statement. Give me just 1 second. 2/1/21. This should be 2/28. There we go. Okay, so those transactions are showing. Then go into reconciliation and change this to 2/28, and I'll use the calendar this time. Starting balance is 167,073.86. Ending balance is 165,393.42. And then at that point, I'll start selecting my transactions. And I'll go in and select my deposits. If there's more than one line item, then I'm going to need to select each one of those line items. So if there's money going into restricted funds, I'll need to select those amounts. And usually what I'll do is I'll click on the transaction, then I'll put a little mark on my piece of paper so that I know that I've selected that item. Also, verifying that the amounts are correct. If the amounts are incorrect, then I'm going to end up in a situation where my balance is going to be off at the very end. So, and it could simply be a penny, and that would literally break or set it off. So, like when we're going through and we're checking these items, it's going to say selected difference. So far, we've selected $7,013.03 in checks and $8,540 in deposits. I don't have any journal entries in this reconciliation, I don't think, so we won't see the journal entries, payments, and the other items. But there'll be totals for all of those items. And the selected difference, these items here in the little drop down, those should match what your bank statement says. So the deposits should match the deposits, the checks should match the checks, transfers should match the transfers. And when you get to the end of selecting all those items, your off by should go to 0. And that's 0 at the start of the thing. They're working on that. So once the off by is 0, basically that's saying that the statement difference, the difference between the starting and ending balance, matches the selected difference, which is the difference between, in our case, the checks and deposits. But there could be a sprinkling of journal entries, some transfers, payments, all of those could be in there as well. So at this point, let me mention something pretty important. If you click cancel, it'll cancel this reconciliation and make you start over. So you never want to click cancel unless you really want to start over. So if for some reason you find out, hey, I need to make a correction to a transaction or create a new transaction, don't click cancel, just go through that process of correcting or modifying or whatever you need to do or adding. Then go back into your checking account and go to reconcile, and then continue your reconciliation. So just don't click cancel unless you really want to start over. So once we're at 0, then we'll click save, and then that will save that bank account reconciliation, mark those transactions as reconciled, and it will lock those transactions as well. So this transaction has been printed, but it's also been reconciled. So in both scenarios, I won't be able to print the report. I won't be able to change the transaction. So to print your bank account reconciliation report, that ties into our event log. So you'll go to the gear and you'll go to retract that. You'll go to the reports icon and you'll go to event log. The event log is stored under the gear inside of Church360 members. When you're working with Church360 Ledger, you'll go to reports and you'll go to event log. And this date range, it flows throughout the program. So I reconciled today. Today is the 19th of April. So we need to make sure our date range is inclusive of whatever we're looking for. And click here. So that shows all of our transactions. Now I've had people in the past, they're looking for a reconciliation and they're like, I can't find it in the list. And these logs can be long. Like they can literally seem like they run forever. And if that's the case and you're looking for a transaction or a reconciliation or whatever, I use Control F on my keyboard, Control F for find. And there's other ways to bring up your find within the system. You can click on the 3 little bars, 3 little dots now, and then go to find, and that'll bring up the same find window. And then you can type in the wording of what you're looking for. And basically the information on your screen is text, so it's looking at every single text item in the list. So this works here. It works in all the screens inside of Church360 Ledger. So if you're looking for something, you may just want to use the find and type in a few characters, and it'll help you find what you're looking for. So and you can use the arrows to jump up and down. Now, items that are in the green hyperlink will allow you to jump over to that item. So this is how you can print your bank account reconciliation report. So you'll basically go to your events log, click on the hyperlink, and then just click print. So that's your bank account reconciliation report. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so that's the last piece of information that I had for this training. So if there's any questions, of course, feel free to post those questions. I tried to answer the ones that were in line with this topic I was talking about while I was talking. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back to our PowerPoint presentation. And what we're going to do is we are now going to go to the quiz. And we're going to go ahead and launch the first quiz question. And I'm going to launch the poll as well so that people can answer the questions. Polls, launch. And question number 1 is going to be true or false. So true or false, handwritten checks will appear in the print queue along with checks to be printed. Okay, it looks like everybody has had a chance to vote, so I will close the poll and share the results. So we had 92% say true and 8% say false. So I'll hide the results and share the answer, and the answer is true. All checks are sent to the print queue. To remove a handwritten check from the print queue, check the box to the left of the check and click Mark as Printed, and click the Mark as Printed button. Question number 2, launch, there we go. True or false? When creating a journal entry, applying a credit to a bank account will decrease the account balance. True or false? This is actually one of the more difficult questions that I ask in all of my trainings. It's pretty tricky. Pretty tough, yeah. Okay, we'll give it about another 10 seconds there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So we had 91-9. So we had true, 91% of the people said true and 9% said false. So I'm going to hide the results and share the answer. That's really good that you guys can remember the credits and debits. I usually keep a little chart. True, a credit to an asset will decrease the account balance while a debit will increase the account balance. Good job, everyone. Okay, next question. Next question, true or false? Let me launch the question, true or false? The chart of accounts report can be used as a trial balance report, true or false? Okay. Give it about 15, 20 more seconds, then we'll close the poll. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So we had 90% say true and 10% say false. So I'm going to hide the results and share the answer. And the answer is true. This report shows the total credits and debits for each account. For specific sums or totals, the report can be exported to Excel and modified. Next question, true or false once again? True or false, you are working with the bank account reconciliation and you find out, oh, this is not true or false, this is multiple choice. And you find out that you need to enter a transaction. What should you do? A, click the save button. B, click the cancel button. Or C, click the orange $ button. Okay, and we'll give it another 20 seconds here. Give people a chance to answer that haven't answered so far. Okay, so I'm going to click, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So we had a split. We had 27% say save the reconciliation, and we have 73% say click the orange button. So I'm going to hide the results and share the answer. And the answer is C. And I think this might be a little tricky for those people that have used Shepherd staff in the past, because Shepherd staff you always had to save. With this, it saves automatically on its own. So the answer is C. Click the home button. It's the orange $. This will take you out of the reconciliation and not delete your work. Once the transaction has been entered, just reopen the reconciliation and continue clearing transactions. And I would say, please, please, please only click cancel if you want to start over. Okay, then our fifth and final quiz question is true or false. To print a reconciliation report, go to the event log. True or false? Okay, it looks like everyone has voted. So I will close the poll and share the results. So we had 82% say true and 18% say false. So I'll hide the results and share the answer. And the answer is true. A bank account reconciliation report can only be printed, can only be printed from the event log. Do you have any questions? And you guys have asked a lot of questions so far. I appreciate all the questions. But if you have any more, please feel free to post those in the question box. Before people start dropping off, it happens rather quickly at the end of the session. I do want to thank everybody for attending today's Church 360 Ledger webinar. We truly hope you enjoyed the session. And if you'd like, after the question and answer session, you can definitely give us a call at 1-800-346-6120. And of course, shoot us an email at support@cts.cph.org. Oh, thank you so much, Julie. I really appreciate it. Pat had a question. She said, what if you have never reconciled? What would you do? That's a great question. The answer to that is, if it's me personally, I'm kind of like a purist when it comes to the reconciliation. Like, I've seen people who will try to reconcile 6 months at a time, 12 months at a time. I only like to reconcile 1 month at a time. So even if I've never reconciled, what I would do is I would go to the prior month and I would start reconciling. So like, this is April, so I would go to March, then I'd reconcile March. Then I would go to, before March is February, I would go to February and I'd reconcile February, then I go to January, I'd reconcile January, and then I would just keep going backwards from there. And my initial focus would be knocking out the current year, but then I could go back in time and I could do last year, and I would basically do it in reverse as well. I'd do December, then November, and I would just keep going backwards until I got them all reconciled to the point that I was satisfied that everything was okay. I always feel like the answer is a little rigid, but if I reconcile every single transaction, then I know all the transactions are correct, and all I got to do is make sure my beginning balance or my initial balance is correct at that point in time. And it just kind of makes me feel comfortable that I've taken a look at everything inside the software and that everything's going to be correct. Oh, great follow-up question. Pat asked, since I did it manually up till now, can I just start from here? And I would say yes. You know, if you're confident that it's all correct, and I've spoken with you numerous times, and I know it's going to be correct. So then, yeah, I would just start from here. So probably I'd take a look at last month for March, and then I would go forward, and April's going to be here shortly, and then I'd reconcile April. So yeah, absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much, Pat. I really appreciate it. Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, I guess I'll go ahead and end the session. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll talk to you soon. So for Jordan Bogart, this is Rod Kiles. We are signing out.